Good evening, and thank you for tuning in to Inmates for Change. My name is Jones. I'm the founder, CEO of the 501c3 not-for-profit Inmates for Change. Our motto is breaking the bondage of destructive thinking. I'm going to introduce my guest in just a second, but let me just get a little brief intro into how the Inmates for Change organization came about. When I came home, I am a returning citizen, so when I came home from prison, I had a very difficult time securing gainful employment. Now, mind you, this is 2010, somewhere around in there, and I've got over 27 years of professional sales experience, 17 years managerial experience. I ran my own business, home improvement and remodeling, for 15 years as a carpenter. And I was a cable tech for 10 years. Being articulate, professional, and intelligent enough to carry on a coherent conversation, I was still denied, in a lot of cases, an opportunity to secure gainful employment. So realizing what an individual will go through with their return from prison, Inmates for Change was born. I knew that there would be a lot of pitfalls, challenges, and adversities that would be coming up, and an individual would need to be versed in how to navigate the field successfully. So we at Inmates for Change, we offer the opportunity for an individual to become motivated and empowered by resources, services, and curriculum that we offer that will help them determine their own destiny. We feel that with the 12-week program that we offer at Inmates for Change, it will do a significant impact in changing an individual's life as well as their trajectory toward successful reintegration and gainful employment. With all that being said, I'd like to welcome a very important guest. This is Mr. Benjamin Ruddell. Ben Ruddell is what we call him in the closed circles that we're in. Ben is the Criminal Justice Reform Project Director for the American Civil Liberties Union, which is also known as the ACLU. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Thanks, Jones. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
Are you nervous?
Just a little bit.
Nervous is good. Nervous is good. So I've got a few questions because there are a lot of information that we want to get across. And we might even take a call or two while we're doing the discourse. For those of you who would like to contact us at the studio, we're at 312-738-1060. Again, 312-738-1060. For those of you who would like to contact Inmates for Change by way of office call, website, or email, we can be reached at 773-746-3075. That's to call the office. The website is inmatesforchange.org, and we take our email at inmatesforchange@gmail. Now, what I'm going to do is get right into it because we've got a lot of information that we want to get across. Ben, I want you to tell us briefly what your organization does and what's your role.
Well, the American Civil Liberties Union of Illinois is a non-profit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to protecting the rights that are guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution, the Illinois State Constitution, and the human rights laws. And we accomplish those goals by litigating in courtrooms, by lobbying in the legislature, which is my primary function, and by educating the public on a variety of civil liberties issues. My particular role at the ACLU as a Criminal Justice Project Reform Director is to advocate in the legislature and elsewhere in support of policies that will help Illinois reform its broken criminal justice system and bring the era of mass incarceration to an end in this state. So it's a big task we've taken on, right, and a lot of work to do. But that's my role.
That's the role and the mission.
That's right.
Great. Well, let me jump right into it because I've got a series of questions here. In your opinion, what's the number one thing the state needs to do to promote successful reentry of a formerly incarcerated person?
Well, I can't limit myself to just one. I think there are two things that I need to highlight as
Okay.
far as what we can do to more successfully reintegrate folks into the world after they come out of prison. The first thing is investment. We have been spending altogether too much money on prisons and not enough money on people. And if we want to reverse this bad situation we're in, we've got to reverse that and start investing in people, investing in the individuals who are returning from prison, in the things that they need to help them stay out of prison. In some cases, that's going to mean housing. In other cases, it's going to mean employment. In some cases, it's going to mean education. And in some cases, it'll mean behavioral health services like substance abuse treatment or treatment for a mental illness. In some cases, it'll mean several of those things because people have multiple needs. But this has to start before people are even released from prison. We need better and more programs inside prison that for people who are incarcerated. But we can't stop once they get out. We need to provide the resources like housing, education, employment, behavioral health services right there in the communities where people are returning. And those are communities that are suffering from decades of disinvestment and that have suffered from having people, large numbers of people taken out of those communities. So mass incarceration itself has negatively impacted these communities, and created a situation where we need to actively target the communities that have suffered from disinvestment, which not coincidentally are the same communities that send the most people to the Illinois Department of Corrections, and offer real economic opportunity and better schools inside those communities, in addition to providing the services directly to the individuals who are getting out of prison.
Wow. Now that's a lot, and I hope that my audience was able to stay with that answer, because me personally, I'm from the area of Inglewood, and we've been depleted of resources and services on a fair level for years, decades even, and I went to school in Woodlawn, and that area looks like a bombed out, war-torn area. So the other side of that is how, but I know that's not for tonight. But how do we put this together? And this is the thing that I do when I'm in organizational meetings and we're at summits where we're meeting with individuals who are all on the same battlefield. We need to start putting together a how-to of how do we initiate getting back into resources? How do we initiate getting back into services? What's the blueprint that we can use, start, or even develop to get ourselves back on the grid for successful transition and upward mobility from community through the individual, through the societal, as well as the corporate America? And it just goes on. Some of this stuff will be before an individual is incarcerated. I believe we need to start with the youngest, at least the age of preschool, to indoctrinate them into this type of newfound, old school type of foundation of you need to do what you're told and you need to show this individual love as well as giving them discipline. So it's that type of thing.
So the second I want to get to, because I remember I mentioned there were two things,
Yes.
and the first thing is investment, and so we need to do something that we haven't been doing nearly enough of, investing. We also need to stop doing something that we've been doing far too much of, and that is sending so many people to prison in the first place and incarcerating people for such excessive lengths of time. The billions of dollars that we're spending to do that are not effective in reducing recidivism. Despite the spending $1.5 billion a year in this state to incarcerate people in the Department of Corrections, we have close to a 50% recidivism rate of people getting picked up for a new crime within 3 years of their release. So we're not doing a good job. This money is not being well spent. And why is that? Well, because locking people up does nothing really to address the root causes of crime.
I agree.
And the experience of being inside prison often leaves people in even worse shape than when they came in, because it's not a nice place to be, as you well know.
Yeah, I do.
Our prisons are still very overcrowded, which limits the ability of people inside the Department of Corrections to render any services or provide any programs in an effective way to help people have a successful reentry. And, to put it bluntly, many people who are in prison don't really need to be in prison for any public safety reason. They could be safely released. But if we don't invest in communities and the communities that people are going back to and the individuals who are going back, many of the people who are released will end up back in the system to repeat the cycle. And so that's why I say that these two things are equally important.
Yeah.
Decarceration on one hand, reinvestment in communities on the other. They go hand in hand as our number one priorities to help people succeed in reentry more than they are today.
You and I were speaking earlier off camera about decarceration, and give me just a highlights tip on the decarceration before I go. I've got a third, fourth, and fifth question for you, but when I heard that term, it's the first time I've heard it. And I consider myself rehabilitated and never going back to prison again, ever, for anything. So what is decarceration in a gist of the nutshell? Now, I know it's a long conversation, but
Well, decarceration, I think, the goal is obviously to reduce the population incarcerated, but how do you get to the goal? In two ways. Fewer people admitted to prison on the front end, and so crimes like marijuana crimes, we at the ACLU think that marijuana should be legalized. We shouldn't be sending anybody to jail or prison for marijuana. And that for drug offenses generally, far too many people are going to prison for that. Not that drugs don't have a negative impact on society, but prison is just not the right place to treat people that have addictions. And somebody whose crime is the possession of a small amount of heroin or cocaine or methamphetamine for their own personal use doesn't belong in prison. And so the ineffectiveness of our prisons in providing public safety is in part because they're so overcrowded, and they're partly so overcrowded because we're sending people who don't pose a public safety threat there. And so fewer people in on the front end is part of decarceration, and people not serving excessive length of stay is the second element of that.
Okay.
Those are the two things that drive incarceration, and if we don't address the excessive lengths of time that people are serving today and reduce length of stay to something more realistic, more reasonable, then we're going to continue to see population increases, because the laws that we put in mean that people who used to serve, for instance, 20 years might now be serving 40 years. And those laws only came in the 1990s. So all that extra time that people are going to serve is mostly still in the future.
Okay.
And if we don't do something about it, then we won't address our over-incarceration problem.
And mind you, viewers, that was the short answer. Okay. Let me ask you this on a more serious note, from what I just said. Not that what you're saying is not serious. We all know a lot of things are broken in when it comes down to giving formerly incarcerated people a fair chance to succeed. But is there anything being done to improve the situation?
Well, on one hand, yes, there have been some positive developments. There have been some new laws passed in the Illinois General Assembly that will make some modest improvements in the situation. The ACLU has supported, and in some cases has helped to lead, some successful efforts to remove some of the barriers that stand in the way of formerly incarcerated people when they get out of prison. So I'll just mention a few of those.
Come right ahead.
In the past year, we worked with Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle's office on a bill that is now a law that will make it much easier and in some cases automatic for people who got arrested as juveniles or got found delinquent for a crime when they were a juvenile to have that record expunged.
Okay.
Another new law makes it possible for the first time for many adults convicted of felonies in Illinois to have their arrest and their criminal records sealed. And so, the distinction from expungement being that law enforcement, prosecutors, courts still have access to the records, but people like employers and landlords and other private actors who are in a position to deny people opportunities don't get access to those records. There's a law that we worked with in the past year to get passed with Representative Kelly Cassidy from the north side of Chicago, as well as Senator Toy Hutchinson, who represents the south suburbs, Kankakee, Grundy County. And what that law does is it addresses a particular problem we had in the law where we had a law called unlawful gang contact that basically encouraged police to harass parolees and to arrest them for nothing more than associating with their own neighbors, friends, and family if the police believe that those people they're associating with are gang members.
You know something, just to interject right there. In the area I'm from, we call those sweeps. And on those days, it would be like on a Tuesday or a Thursday. Those were the days that you would not be standing around the liquor store or out on the corner because we knew that this sweep was coming and anyone would get wrapped up and caught up no matter what you were doing. And I'm so glad that that law was signed by the governor to prohibit police. But, I mean, it came late, but it still got here.
Yeah, and specifically what the new law requires is that to be arrested for this offense, found guilty for this offense, a person actually has to be engaged in some criminal conduct.
Absolutely.
Not just hanging out with somebody that the police think is in a gang. And that's, most people probably thought you had to be engaged in criminal conduct to be arrested, but this was truly a guilt by association law, and we're happy to have helped to dial it back.
I'm glad to hear you say that too. That sounds good.
So yes, we've made some first good steps. And of course, we should stop throwing so many roadblocks in people's paths when they're trying to make a life for themselves after prison. But on the other hand, we've gone backwards in some areas too. And the main area we've gone backwards is on funding the community-based social service providers who provide the essential services that help people re-entering citizens stay out of prison. And so we had 2 years without a state budget, and that decimated many of these providers. Some of them did not survive. And so we have fewer services in the communities that people are going back to. And what we need is far more services than we ever had before this crisis. But we have to make up ground and repair the damage that the budget crisis caused to our social service infrastructure and rebuild the community-based providers that have gone under or who have lost staff and suffered before we can even begin the task of expanding the capacity of that infrastructure to what it really needs to be.
Okay. Let me cut you there. That's a great and informed answer. What I've got is a caller on the line who's been patiently waiting.
Okay.
Caller, thank you for waiting and being patient. Give us your name and what is your question or your comment?
Yes, sir. My name is Ray. I call my friend every week.
How you doing, Ray?
But you know what? You're missing the boat, sir. I mean, by that I mean you're supposed to stop the kids from going to prison. Once you do that, then you may have a better chance of them not going back in. But that starts in schools. But the kids are afraid to go to school because they're afraid to get shot. They're afraid that of all the bullying that's going on, and then the teachers can't do anything because they get in trouble even if they look bad at the kid. So starting the schools early, stop them, and then maybe, just maybe, we could cut that in half, and then you can have money to help the people. But the way it's going now, that'll never happen because there's just too much money out there, bad money. So,
Well, let me say right now, thank you, and Ray, that's a great comment. But also, I mentioned earlier in my part of the commentary in tonight's discussion was that we need to start as early as preschool. One thing is for sure that the community has changed, the dynamic in the community has changed, societal laws have changed, nurturing, parenting, as well as disciplining and educating a child has changed. So these rules and laws that we have that are in play now, a child who goes to school in a community that he cannot learn in, there's an old African proverb that says the ruin of a nation begins in the home of its people. So that is part of the components that goes in with these different variables of the problem as well as how to produce a solution. I want to thank you again, Ray, for calling in. And you're right, you do call every week and you've got some great stuff. So don't stop listening tonight because we've got more. I've got a couple of more questions, Ben, if that's okay with you.
Of course.
Great, and I'm going to get right to it. Those of you who would like to join the conversation, we're at 312-738-1060. And again, for those of you who would like to contact us when the show is over tonight, not next month or anything like that, just this is not the last show, Ms. Linda Coleman. Inmates For Change, 773-746-3075. The website is inmatesforchange.org, and the email address is inmatesforchange@gmail.com. Ben, I threw that little piece in there. My neighbor saw my show last week, and she thought that was the last show that we were having. So I just had to let her know that, no, we're on the air through December. So here's the next question that I have for you. You talked earlier about how we need to reduce the number of people in prison in order to support formerly incarcerated individuals and the communities that they return to. But how specifically would you suggest we go about reducing the IDOC population?
So, in broad terms, as I mentioned before, fewer people in and shorter sentences. So people convicted of crimes like drug possession, small-time drug sales, and shoplifting, they don't need to go to prison. They might need some kind of legal intervention to address their criminal behavior, but we need to stop acting like prison's the only tool in the toolbox.
Okay.
We also need to reclassify some felonies like possession of small amounts of controlled substances, retail theft of low value property, as misdemeanors. We should legalize marijuana. We should get rid of mandatory minimums for drug crimes. And then secondly, we need to dial back on the excessive lengths of time that people serve in prison. That's far longer often than is necessary to protect public safety. So dialing back on the so-called truth in sentencing laws that limit how much good time people can earn, and also going back to a parole system like we had before 1978, where people get periodically a hearing with a parole board to determine whether or not they're ready to be released. Those are some of the things we can do to reduce our population in prison.
Okay, I'm looking at the time. We're down to a minute.
Okay.
Now, I'm going to ask you this last question. You mentioned a lot of new laws that politicians need to pass in order to reform the criminal justice system and support successful reentry. But what can people in the community do to push for positive changes?
Well, we all need to...
40 seconds.
All right. We all need to do our part to welcome people returning from prison back in our communities. If we're employers, we need to be willing to hire people with criminal records. If we're landlords, we need to be willing to rent to people with criminal records. If we're people in elected office, we need to give private sector folks incentives to give opportunities to formerly incarcerated people. But the thing that all individuals have and all can contribute are their voices and their votes. ACLU is a nonpartisan organization, so I won't tell your candidates who they should vote for, but people can educate themselves about where candidates stand on real criminal justice reform, whether they're running for governor, attorney general, or some other office. And if they're not standing up for reform the way you think they should, then tell them how you feel and vote for somebody who is.
Okay. Now, with that, we're going to wrap this show. I guarantee you this. I hope I can say this. We're going to have you back on once or twice more to get deeper into the conversation. So
I'd enjoy that.
You'll accept. This program has been made possible in part by support from the Mobile Doc. My name is Jones. This is Inmates for Change. Thank you so much. Have a good night.